we have the Dynasty Fantasy Football trade deadline coming up this week. So get your trades in. So we've got a few different prompts based on a few different scenarios of how teams could be looking. We'll start it off with if you're a middle of the pack team. Let's say, it's a 12-team league, and you're, a number 5, a number 6, or even a number 7 team. How do you decide, Braden, what path to take if you're kind of in the middle of the road there?
I ask myself 3 questions. First, do I need additional depth or do I need top end talent to elevate myself to that true contender status? I think there's kind of some aspects where maybe you're the 5 seed because you've gotten unlucky based on your schedule. Maybe you have, first or second in points scored, but you're also first or second in points allowed. At that point, you're probably still a contender regardless. Now, if you're kind of in the similar boat on the opposite side of things, maybe you've gotten some really lucky matchups. Maybe you're, in the 4 seed by about a game, but your point scored is like 10th in the league. At that point, I'm also looking potentially not to bottom out necessarily, but to evaluate my options and play for the future a little bit more. The second question I'm going to ask myself is, do I own my own first round pick this year? If I do not own my own first round pick this year, I am almost certainly trying to win. Now, that doesn't mean I'm trying to mortgage the future, but at the same time, I'm not going to make my team worse in 2025 just for the sake of making it worse, like I might be if I was, in control of my own first round pick. And the third and final question is, will this decision, going all in, I guess, make it easier to pick a direction for the following season? And this could go both ways. Now, potentially you're in a league where you're trading for a bunch of veterans, guys in their like early to mid 30s who have kind of short shelf lives, but you just need them for this 1 year to get over the top. At that point, maybe it's worth it because it also makes rebuilding the following season a hell of a lot easier. Or on the flip side of things, from the dynasty perspective, maybe you're trading for some top end guys and you're fully embracing just going all in for the next couple of years. Maybe you're trading for, a Jamar Chase if he comes available, a Tyreek Hill, one of those elite wideouts. Maybe Tyreek Hill doesn't fit in that category now, but I think overall, those are the 3 questions I would ask. And when in doubt, I would lean towards trying to win. At the end of the day, you're probably putting money into dynasty leagues. You want to win them and have those bragging rights. So if I have a chance to win, I'm going to try to.
Yeah, I think you hit it right there on the head with all 3 of those. Coming from experience, I think the later we're in year 4 of a league for reference. I think the more I've gotten into the league, the more I've started to prioritize actually winning that year's championship. Because you can build for the future all you want, but if your timelines are messed up or if things aren't clicking at the same time, it's not always going to work out. So it always boils down to me is kind of keeping it real with what you have. Do you need a Kareem Hunt? You can go get him for a second, or do you need to go trade for a Kenneth Walker? How I judge that is kind of look at the dynasty assets in top 30 values. So 1 through 30, and how many of those guys do I have on my team? If you have 3 to 4 of those top 30 guys in your team and you're in the middle of the pack, I would lean towards a go all in type of deal. You have sustainable success looming. Those guys don't really lose value, and if you have to, they're pretty liquid. You can trade them off. If you're in the middle of the pack and you have Alvin Kamara and Joe Mixon as your best 2 players, I would lean towards just being real with your team, knowing you're not going to win it, and maximizing their value right now. So for me, it's just kind of being honest with your own team, and then also keeping those top 30 assets. You can always trade them away. If you go get one and you don't win the championship, you can always trade them away. They're pretty liquid, so I always look at that.
Yeah, I think you both are putting it pretty well. I was going to say pretty similar things. I think if you are, in the playoff picture, if the playoff started today and you are in it, and you're a top half or above team in terms of points scored, I think that's a pretty good indication of you could potentially make something happen here and make a strong push. But say you're in the same scenario, you're the number 6 team in the playoffs right now. You're 5-5. You're bottom half in points scored, and your players' playoff schedules aren't looking great, and you got a bunch of old guys. I would say odds are good you want to ship them off. But I think it depends on your team, and that's going to sound obvious, but every team has certain needs, and even if there's a team that's 5-5 that's got a bunch of old guys and a team that's 5-5 and a bunch of young guys, you're going to be doing different things. So it's just important to keep that in mind. But let's flip things over to, let's say you're a contending team. When would you be looking to trade away players who are out for the year, like Rashee Rice, Brandon Ayuk and Dak Prescott if you're, looking to make a push for a championship right now?
I would say that if I have a good kind of high end talent pool at that position, in addition to my injured reserve player, and I'm also maybe one piece away from winning this year, I'm open to making a move. Sam, I know you and I are both in a league where I traded away Rashee Rice. Additionally, in that league, I've got a pretty solid wide receiver core already. I've got Malik Neighbors, who I hit on, I think, fifth overall in our rookie draft. I've also got Devontae Smith in that league. Khalil Shakir has stepped up big for me. So I traded Rashee Rice and a couple of later pick swaps for Devontae Adams and a first round pick this year. That's likely going to be between the 104 and the 107. Adding Adams gives me probably a more consistent wide receiver 4 or a wide receiver 5 compared to Jameson Williams. I would not have made this trade if Adams was going to be my wide receiver 2 this year. I think, Cade, you kind of touched on it earlier with you have to be real with your team. If you lose one of these guys, and maybe you were competitive before, but you can't be competitive after losing them, now is not the time to double down and just, cash in assets to keep a pipe dream alive. I think you definitely can pick the right time to sell these guys, but at the same time, Dynasty is a long-term game. Don't make a rash decision to sell a guy who's out for the year just for the outside chance of making a run.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go to an example as well. Me and Braden are in a super flex league. We are both 5-5, and just both teetering on the playoff picture. One's in, one's out. In that league, I have had Puka out, Rashee Rice on IR. I lost JJ McCarthy, lost Christian Kirk to IR, and I've kind of thought about, do I trade Rashee Rice? And it just comes down to my quarterback situation is so bad. My QB2 is between Anthony Richardson, who is just coming back and was benched, and Will Levis, who had the same thing happen for Mason Rudolph. So trading Rashee Rice, I'm not even sure what I could get at the QB position that would be worthwhile. So I made the choice to just keep him, stash him, and hope that next year the cards fall in my favor. I wouldn't hate if somebody chose the opposite way, but I think for this perspective of Rashee Rice, I would like to be 7-3 or 6-4 and in control of a playoff spot before I trade him. Whereas me and Braden are both teetering on that edge where if I make it, cool, but keeping it real, I'm probably not going to win the championship. So I'm just going to sit on him.
Yeah, and I think I would much prefer to trade Ayuk before I trade Rashee Rice. I think I would be looking to hold Rashee Rice unless it is absolutely necessary. Like you mentioned, Cade, if you're a 7-3 team, an 8-2 team, even without him, I think that's a fine time to trade him away. But if you're kind of teetering with it, I would lean to hold on just because I think he's going to be really valuable once he comes back, whenever that may be. But yeah, I think for Ayuk, I think that offense is going to be fine even without him, and it has been so far. So I'd be looking to trade him before I trade Rashee Rice. If I can get a first-round pick for Ayuk, I would be doing that probably 10 times out of 10. But for Dak, I would say unless there is a glaring need for a QB2 in a Superflex league, and that was Dak Prescott for your team, I'd probably be holding on to him. If he's your QB1, get the hell. I mean, shit, trade him right now. If he was your QB1, you weren't probably competing anyways. So I think if he's clearing up a glaring need for a super flex spot, that's fine. You could do so. But if it's not going to make much of a difference for this year, I would probably be holding on to him because even when he comes back, he's going to have CeeDee Lamb, probably a new head coach if Mike McCarthy's fired after the year. So I think brighter days are ahead for Dak Prescott. But I'd be leaning on holding Rice, trading Ayuk before I would trade Rashee Rice. But if you are in a much more desperate situation, and you're an 8-2, 7-3 team, I think that's fine. On the flip side, if you're a rebuilding team, Braden, are you more likely to prioritize the rookie picks, which you can kind of do anything you want with to an extent, or would you be looking to buy low on some of the underperforming rookies, like this year, Caleb Williams, Rome Odunze, that Bears stack, who unironically was my first round of our St. Thomas Dynasty League, so that's not ideal. But would you be more likely to go after those disappointing first and early second round guys from rookie drafts last year?
This is a little bit of a cop-out answer, but I would say you kind of have to pick your spot with a lot of these guys. In general, though, if there's a guy I'm confident with who's kind of had a disappointing rookie season, like, for example, both Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze, I think if you can buy low on either of these guys right now, I would rather buy low on them than trade maybe for a first round pick. So, I mean, obviously, Caleb Williams can cost you multiple firsts in a Superflex league, but you can probably get Rome Odunze for maybe Darnell Mooney plus right now. If there's a guy who's in contention and really needs that help right now, if you trade him Darnell Mooney in second round pick, you might get Rome Odunze for that. I'm doing that as a rebuilder 10 times out of 10. And as a contender, I might do it 8 times out of 10 if I really need that help right now. If you're trading for picks, they're guaranteed to increase slightly in value. That's the great part about rookie draft picks. But the players are a lot more boom or bust. You eventually have to turn those picks into players. I'd lean towards taking the upside swing if I'm confident in the player's long term outlook. And additionally, either if your league does not have a trade deadline or if you're allowed to trade after you're eliminated, you can flip those guys in the middle of the season if they string together kind of a mini breakout performance. Speaking of Rome Odunze, let's say he has 2 straight 100-yard games in weeks 15 and 16. If I'm eliminated from the playoffs, maybe I flip him in week 17. So I think you can pay off your investment in more ways by trading for the players.
So what I would prefer personally is to invest in younger players or players that are on IR, obviously. But I think to answer your question, Sam, it kind of depends on the type of league you're in, whether it's a league where trades are flying around or a league where people are stingy, because you might have to just do what you can. I know I'm in some leagues where you can't really make a move for these Rome Odunzes because it's on a team that's bad and they really value him. They think he's going to break out. It's just not in the cards. I was looking at a stat, I think, from Dynasty Nerds, and they said if you pick after the 105, your hit rate is like 33%. That the player is like actually startable on some weeks, which is crazy. So obviously, I would lean the young players, but sometimes you just don't have a choice. Like I know I'm a T. Higgins and Chris Olave are both in my bench in a league. I'm not going to trade them for second round picks because I just don't think that's of value to me. But I will say, I just think when you're rebuilding, look for those guys, like in our league, for example, in their respective rookie drafts. Kyron Williams, undrafted. Tyrone Tracy, undrafted. Khalil Shakir, undrafted. There's so much other ways to add talent, or if you swing and miss for a Rome Odunze, let's say, you go get him, invest your picks, you can still add free agents from the rookie draft that weren't drafted, take a shot on them. Puka Nacua comes to mind. Obviously, the hit rate is very, very low, but so is the hit rate in the third round and the late second round too. So I would invest in just IR players first, then try to go get your struggling players that you think personally have a chance to be good and are underperforming, and then obviously keep your first round pick if you're bad. That's the key for me.
Yeah, that's a good piece to end on there. But yeah, I think there are certainly certain players, like certain young players, Caleb Williams, Rome Odunze, both great examples of guys that are worth going out and trying to get if you're a rebuilding team. But Cade, you made a good note. Usually, if you have a Rome Odunze type guy, that was your first round pick. Those are on teams that are rebuilding and are probably not, looking to trade him right now. But I tend to lean picks actually. So I'm glad we've got some differing answers. Braden, in our St. Thomas League, in last year's draft class, it's a 16-team league. I held 4 first-round picks: the 101, the 107, I believe the 110, and maybe the 114. I kept the 101 and the 107. That turned into Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze. I turned the 110 and Zamir White, I think, into Tyreek Hill. Granted, I think that was kind of a scam at the time. I probably wouldn't expect many people to get that kind of value, in my opinion. But then again, Tyreek's been pretty bad this year. And then I turned the 114 into Joe Mixon and DeAndre Swift. And then I packaged DeAndre Swift and a very valuable 2025 pick together for Jahmyr Gibbs. And my team that was 2-12 last year is now 8-2 in the number 2 seed in the league right now at this point in the season. So picks, in my opinion, are the way to go. Maybe it's just because I had success with that. But the thing with this year too is there's also really not many other struggling rookies, or at least ones that I would, prefer to pay big bucks for, that I think could, start down the road. So that does have part of it to do too. But I think I genuinely would rather go with picks, just because I think you have so much more flexibility with them than you would do with a young player. because like you said, it's kind of just an up in the air at that point. You don't really know. With picks, you can turn that into veterans, and that's the route that I would rather go. But we just talked about trading some young guys away. Is it worthwhile to do so, or would you rather pay the big bucks for a marquee player if you're a contending team, or would you rather just focus on trading the less valuable picks for a guy who's going to help you make a run now?
I think it depends on where my title contention window looks after I make this trade. I think you kind of have to evaluate where you are currently and then have to evaluate where you're going to be with either avenue you choose. So if I'm having at least the remainder of 2024 and all of 2025 in a clear title contention window, I'm okay going after the star. I'm okay paying, multiple first round picks for a guy like Jalen Waddle, for a guy like Chris Olave, even who's had some injuries. For a guy like Rashee Rice, I would pay a first plus for. Um, Granted, those prices are going to fluctuate depending on Superflex versus one quarterback. But if I'm kind of competing for 2024 and it's either unexpected, maybe I had kind of a down year in 2023 and this was like the start of a rebuild, but I don't have a ton of long-term assets yet. Maybe I'll prioritize more of like an Alexander Madison for, a pair of third round picks just to fill that stopgap at running back. Maybe I'll go trade, a second round pick for Aaron Jones and just kind of go for this one season where maybe I can make a little bit of noise, but I'm not mortgaging my future and risking it blowing up in my face before I can actually come out of the other side of the rebuild. So overall, it definitely depends on team construction. If I have to pick one, just generally, I would say to go for the stars. At the end of the day, Cade, you mentioned it earlier, the more top 30 assets you have in Dynasty, the better you're going to be. And a lot of those guys are young enough where even if this move doesn't work out for you now, you probably still get one more title contention window with them, or at the very least, they're going to retain a lot of their value and you can flip them in a year or two regardless.
Yeah, and I'm going to quickly just say that I would rather go for the star if you have the assets to do so. But sometimes you're in a position where your picks are dry, maybe your bench is dry, and you need to trade a second round pick for a Kareem Hunt, 2/3 for Kareem Hunt, Alexander Madison. Um, Obviously, go ahead and do that. But swinging for the star for me is something that if you can get a building block and you think that you're not going to bottom out in the next couple of years, I would lean towards that. Recently, I just got outbid last night actually for Kenneth Walker. I thought I put together a pretty good offer, but the other guy who wanted him just blew him away. But I'm not going to take those picks and just go invest in Kareem Hunt right now because I think I wanted the upside of the star player. Now that didn't happen, I'm kind of still looking towards getting the star player. If it comes down to it, late Monday night, and I need a depth piece, I think reverting to that option is good. But again, like Braden said, just kind of depends on where your team is. If you have 5 top 30 players and you don't have a lot of picks, then for sure, go get some rentals. Try to win the championship. But it's all about league dependency and obviously about what your team needs.
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, I don't really have a whole lot to add to that. Sure, I would prefer the marquee player, the superstar, but who wouldn't? At the end of the day, I think unless you can buy way low on a guy, I think Braden, back to last year, your Derrick Henry example, you were preaching that Derrick Henry's a great buy in Dynasty because his value's way down, and look what that turned into. I think if you can find somebody to have value like that, I think like a Joe Mixon maybe, a George Kittle, guys who are both balling out that are older at their position but are still very fantasy relevant. I think that's something that you should do, but I tend to stay away from that unless I'm confident that I can get multiple years out of a guy. I don't like just doing 1 year rentals if I can avoid it. But yeah, that's obviously easier said than done. But yeah, I think buying low on a aging asset is the way to go. If you can do that on a higher end player, all the better. But that's much easier said than done. And then our last little scenario here, if you are kind of, I don't want to say stuck in the middle because we already kind of hit on that, but if you're deciding between doing a 1 year retool versus a full rebuild, how would you decide which way to go?
In Superflex, this definitely comes down to whether or not I have an elite quarterback. If I have one or more of Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, and Joe Burrow, I'm probably leaning towards a 1 year retool at that point. Those guys are all going to retain their values. I can't afford to waste 2 full seasons of their primes just to bottom out and hope that maybe I can bat, 750 on my rookie draft picks. The only exception would be if I have one of those quarterbacks and legitimately zero other secure long-term asset options. Like if I'm consistently starting uh, a bunch of running backs who are, like I mentioned with Alexander Madison, if I'm starting him and maybe I was starting Jordan Mason as my running backs, maybe my wide receiver core is, a bunch of guys in their 30s. Maybe if George Kittle is my starting tight end, Travis Kelce on my roster as well. At that point, maybe you look towards more of a full-term rebuild, and at that point, you have the option to either cash in that elite quarterback for a haul if the market presents itself, or you hold and, in 2 years, they're probably still going to have considerable value and you'll have better, pieces around him. But overall, if I don't have one of those quarterbacks, and in particular, if my quarterbacks are more kind of in that stopgap solution realm, maybe a Sam Darnold and Kirk Cousins are my starters in Superflex, then I'm more open to a full rebuild unless I have both a top 6 dynasty running back and a top 12 dynasty receiver. Those positions are definitely easier to come by in Superflex leagues than quarterback is, but that doesn't mean they're not, still a premium. So in Superflex, it really comes down to the quarterbacks. In one quarterback leagues, this question is a lot more difficult. I think it depends on realistically how many just generally top 30 players do you have on your roster. If you have 2 or fewer, I think at that point you can look towards a full rebuild. If you have 3 or more, I think at that point you want to go for a 1-year retool. Overall, I think, there's a lot of different avenues you can choose. I would lean towards the retool if at all possible, though.
I think you just took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to do a 1 QB example. Say your best player is A.J. Brown. You have a couple top 30 players as well. It all hinges on the top asset. If you have A.J. Brown and you want to do a full rebuild, you are trading him. If you want to do a retool, you're building around him. Like for me, I have CeeDee Lamb in every league I'm in. I would never go into a full rebuild because that would mean trading CeeDee Lamb. For me, it's just about he's 25 years old. I trust him when Dak comes back. I would rather retool around a guy like that, a 25 to 27-year-old receiver, than trade him away. If your receiver core is 29, 30, 31 years old, then you look in the opposite direction. But I think A.J. Brown's kind of that perfect example. 27-year-old, top 25 asset. It's just kind of like, what do you prefer? And I think that's where it all hinges on, is that top 30 asset.
Yeah, really the only thing that I'll add to that, if you think you might have a shot next year after doing a retool, then just rebuild. Like if you're not confident enough that you are for sure a contender after the retool, then it is not worth your while. At that point, just tear it down and plan for 2 years from now, because that's going to do you more good than a failed retool will. So that's really all I have to add to that. But that was a fun little dynasty trade deadline segment. Hopefully that helped you guys out for the playoff stretch of your leagues.